I'm not sure it's working.
It says it's streaming live.
I was going to say it says that's for me as well.
Yeah, I got the warning, but it didn't actually connect. I'm not sure it's working.
Hold on a second. It says it's streaming live.
I was going to say it says that's for me.
All
I see it.
right.
I see it on
First,
YouTube.
yeah, first thing I'm going to do is ask YouTube if they're seeing this because we had some technical difficulties with YouTube connecting. So let's see. Are you seeing this video? Tech issue. All right, let's see if someone in chat replies. That'll be the
I'll reply.
indicator.
Yes, I'm seeing it.
Okay.
I looked up YouTube and we are there.
All right, so I'm popping out chat, reminding people to ask questions as always. All right. And let me share my screen. So sorry, folks, a little bit of technical difficulty starting up. YouTube freaked out on me trying to get the stream going. So today we have a pretty cool show. We're going to be talking about the helpful content update. But before we do that, just want to mention that I have a suspicion. I'm going to call it a suspicion. It's unproven, but I have been able to see some recovery recently on sites that fell recently, and the solution I had was kind of not what I would expect. And so my suspicion is that during this most recent core update, all of the dumpster fire chaos that was happening might be pointing out this is very tinfoil and unproven, might be related to the fact that Google isn't updating the published list of Googlebot IPs. And so, based on that suspicion, which isn't proven yet, I allowed non-verified Google bots to visit my website, and my site recovered. All right, within 24 hours. Not saying it's your problem. Something I suspected, tried out. We're looking for evidence on this. I have a suspicion that Google isn't being good about maintaining the published list. And if you're using solutions that rely on the Google published IP ranges to only allow verified bots to your website, and those solutions use that published feed, then you might be blocking valid Google bots from visiting your site. So if you are losing your mind about catastrophic loss, that's at least something you can try. If it's that for you, the turnaround would be fast, like 24 to 48 hours. You allow unverified Google bots, you would see ranking recovery start to happen quickly, if that's what it is, and if that's happening to you. So I wanted to let you know as a public service announcement that that's something we're looking into, but we cannot prove as of yet. So just wanted to put that out there because I know a lot of people are going out of business this week as a result of this latest round of updates. And that is terrifying and horrific, and I feel your pain. So that is one thing you can try. It's one thing I tried and I did see a result. Let me know if you get results. Let me know if you have any proof on the matter. We'd like it. So let us know in the YouTube comments if you have something to share, or ping me on Skype.
Yeah, and that
All
goes
right.
either way. If you do it and it recovers, awesome. If you do it and nothing happens, also awesome. Let us know.
Yep. We are waiting on our presenter. So while we wait for our presenter, she had to reboot, also having technical issues this morning. I figure we would take a look at some of the comments. If you have questions right now, let us know. Otherwise, we'll kind of talk about what's going on. So, Lee, you just wrapped up your training. How did that go? Where did it end?
That was awesome. We've got the next one starting in 2 weeks, basically. So if people are interested in that, they can ping me. The test site that we did continues to climb. We now have 3 of the 6 services have #1 rankings in the test site that we did. So the SEO keeps climbing and climbing on those, and it's fun to watch. And people were excited by that. So loved that. So I'm excited for the next one. I've got some ideas about what we could tackle that would be fun in the next training.
And where can people go to learn more?
testedseotraining.com. You can get all the details there. And if you decide that it's right for you, just reach out to me and we'll schedule a time to talk.
Yeah, that's a lot of #1 rankings and an 8-week program. How far into the program did you get your first #1?
It was about week 6, but you also have to keep in mind that I didn't actually week 1 when I asked people what they wanted to do. So it was after week 1 that I bought the sites and put up content. So it's a little
5 weeks.
Yeah, about 5 weeks, and we had 6 weeks we were #1, 5 weeks or 4 weeks we were on page 1. We moved gradually from 6 to 3 and then up to 1.
Nice. Yeah, that's similar to what I got when I did it last year before last. When did this start? Long time ago.
Yeah, forever.
Yeah. It's happened a lot. So getting through the boilerplate, just remember Magic PR, our sponsor. It's not a paid sponsorship, it's a barter. We do use press releases for testing SEO concepts. They provide the press releases for that research, and we share the information when we get it. So that's the goal of this sponsorship. So if you have press release needs, if you need referring domains, press releases are a great option to hit those numbers. Keep that in mind. Reach out to Madge. He'll help you figure out what's the best solution and the right way to go about it. So I recommend that you talk to him about what you need to do, and he'll help you out. All right, so we talked about tested SEO training, and I'd like to remind people that Lee also has a new backlink tool out there. If you're going to talk to Lee about the training, also talk about this, see if it's a good fit for you. He's doing cloud links, and he has an interesting technology for doing it. It makes it private, makes it all yours, so you're not sharing resources with other things that could make you look bad and drag you down. So it's something you would own and control. So talk to Lee about it. It's pretty cool. All right. So let me stop sharing that. And Carolyn, I understand that you have information about the helpful content update, and some of it is going to be paywalled in a report that you sell. So I'm disclosing that up front, and I'm just mentioning that there's this sharing wall where on one side you don't want to give away your product for free, but on the other side we want to talk about what this is and help people understand it and bring some understanding to the table so it's not so nebulous. Because one of the problems I've had with helpful content updates since the beginning was that it was so poorly defined, and everybody had a different definition of what it is and how it works, and there was no data coming to the table. I even had my own theories on it. I still do. And so that's kind of the part where I'm really interested in talking today, is understanding, defining what is the helpful content update, and how did we come to the understanding of what it is. And so that's my goal. But I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kind of guide everything. So that's what I'm hoping to understand. And I understand that there is a limit to what you're going to share today. Is that correct?
That is. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. Sorry, I have a computer that decided to update, 10 minutes before before we got started. So I'm dialing in a little bit. Helpful content. I think as you know, with a testing background, that's primarily the doorway that I took to try and see what the helpful content system was trying to update. What problem was it trying to solve, I guess, is the question. And what was my first clue? Of course, it came through the indexation testing, which I think probably everybody, at least who's here, knows about it. But I think right now I'm on day 960, something like that, on the project.
So just so everybody knows, what she's saying there is, for the past 960 days, she has been studying Google's ability to crawl pages and index the content, looking at new pages every day, seeing, did it get crawled? Did it get indexed? How fast did it happen? Which Google bots did it? Was it the mobile Google bot? Was it just the simple web request Google bot? Which version numbers? And you have all this data on how indexing is performing. And that's your crawl or no crawl YouTube channel, right?
Yes. I've since moved that over to Substack. So there's paid access to that on Substack. And I share almost every day, what's the state of the indexing system, what's Google doing. But yes, that is all there. And there's like at least 2 years worth on YouTube. So if you are curious, you want to see what the heck is interesting about the indexation system, you can run through a couple of those and see if that's the kind of information that would be useful to you. So, but yeah, so it was through the indexing that I started to see something, and I wasn't sure at the time that it was the helpful content, because I think I agree with you in terms of it's been described to us in very nebulous terms. When you use what you're, the name of something and how you describe it, like, well, just write more helpful content, just do this, just do that. It didn't really explain it as far as I was concerned. So anyway, so the thing was I knew I was seeing something, and it was a bias in the content that was making it through the indexation system. Now, I think on this particular one where this data came from, I ran about 358 ultimate, tests. So half of those were for the simple keyword, half of those were for JavaScript to confirm first pass and second pass. And so essentially what I found was that how shall I say this? If I didn't have a topical nucleus to my test site, it had an impact on my indexation rates. And before everything, now I break everything down in the guide. Like I go back in history, like, we had primary desktop crawler sites and primary mobile crawler sites. Even back then, between those two, they were getting different indexation rates. So if you had a desktop primary site, at least if you didn't have a topical center, you had terrible indexation rates. And it was better even without a topical nucleus on the smartphone primary. But all of that changed last fall when they kind of said we're moving to mobile first indexing. And I do think when we go back, or when we look back to that, I think that's going to be far more significant than even I think we understand at this point. So primarily that's kind of what set me off on that path, is basically seeing that in the SERPs there is a bias to what it will push through and serve. So then I ended up doing some behind the scenes, like people who would share their information and say like, hey, I'm having trouble, because it was people who had indexation resistant pages. And so they shared their stuff and I took a look at it and I started to see that a lot of what they were having trouble getting indexed had to do with what their content actually was. So it really just started out, and I think I'm talking to a group of testers, right? So it's like, I think it's so cool that SEO testing could have unlocked a lot of this.
I find it fascinating because you're exactly right. Like, we used to do the Kyle Roof style 2 above, 2 below single variable testing, and we would often use random alpha, just total gibberish, and then we test things in a gibberish keyword. And to control the variables, we would have no topical nucleus. And then there came a point where that no longer worked. They wouldn't stay in the index. Our testing frameworks all started failing, and we couldn't do the research because we couldn't keep the test cases in the index. And as of late, I'm thinking about my recent testing, and you're kind of right. Like, I've been getting really good indexation, but I have always put in a topical nucleus in it. I haven't been doing the single variable testing, been doing other forms of testing where there is a topical nucleus. And typically I would look for very obscure entities that people don't know, like the names of microscopic fossils, obscure microscopic fossils, because they'll be in the entity database. I can use that as my topical nucleus and not get a ton of traffic to spoil the test. But you're right, I had to have a topical nucleus. Lee, what do you think about this notion?
I think it's interesting because one of the theories that we had way back, was when random alpha used to be like the key to everything. We thought, okay, it's unique because they're all gibberish. They don't map to anything. Google's never seen anything like this before. Of course, it's going to love it. But when it started failing, one of the theories was, okay, well, they can't map this to anything in the knowledge graph. So they're not sure what to do with it. And so they don't, do anything. So that supports the concept of you have to have at least something that they can tie to. It can't just be pure. And even, Kyle's rhinoplasty type of sites that are lorem ipsum, they still have, the rhinoplasty, the keywords, the entities, and things like that on the page. So you can understand that this is about, a rhinoplasty clinic in this city, as opposed to yeah.
Yeah, it needs to at least be gibberish with a topic.
Yes.
and that still works. That today, that still works. That ranks number 1 in some cases, page 1 in many other cases. All of the rhinoplasty plano type canaries in the coal mine are alive and well even after the core update. So those are alive today. So that is still true today.
So, Carolyn, let me ask this question that would, and hopefully this doesn't, get into areas of your research you don't want to give away. Are you suggesting that, with the sites that you've seen, the pages that have been resistant to ranking, for example, we always use the apple pie recipe, they're not apple pie enough? Is that kind of what you're suggesting, in terms of, if you're not apple pie enough, you're not going to rank?
Well, I do think that is true. Like, we often call that the price of admission, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the goal is make it in the show, make it in the top 100 somewhere. And then, you've at least paid enough to be able to now start to compete. In this particular case, what I saw was, how businesses would have a service that they offer, but they have all these other side services, right? They're all looking for how can I increase the revenue of my business? They're not too worried about, hey, is Google going to like this service if I connect them together? You know how you've always said, if you're a plumber that does electrical work, not good. It's like you can do it, but don't expect that, you can use them all indiscriminately and be successful organically. But it was more that case where I felt like, if I was putting them on a GMB, like each one of majority of their service pages would have all been different categories if I was putting a GMB together. So
I can't add pet grooming to my plumbing and electrical site?
Lee, you probably can do whatever you want.
But you're saying that's a bad idea. That's a bad plan.
It might not be as successful as you hope. Let's put it that way. But, I think part of it is, the piece to the helpful content that is so tricky is that everything we're talking about here isn't new, right? Like relevance or having enough diversity of many kinds, on your content. And the weird thing that I find is I think, and I was talking with Maria Sayas earlier, and the idea of just losing out some of your pages to other pages on your site because for whatever reason, I think we all come from a background like 10, 12, 15 years ago that if you had a keyword phrase and you created your page around that phrase, you were fine. And then you found another keyword phrase and you're like, oh, I'll write a page about that keyword phrase. And then you were fine. But that is no longer the case because I think I had a consulting client, this was a couple of years ago. They were trying to rank a page that they felt was their money page, but they kept using the synonyms of that phrase and creating other pages around it. So they had these pages fighting each other. So I'm not saying that helpful content is only, two pages that fight. I wouldn't consider that a helpful content issue. I think that the way the system, I believe this, based on what they've said, that, they tag certain things, and that if you have more unhelpful content, then you're going to suffer a site-wide sort of downward trend. Mm-hmm. So I think the difference between what we've always seen and known, and that relevance matters, I think at this point, if you have what they consider, and what I talk a lot about in the in the guide is really more of a mindset, looking at what is it that it's really targeting. It's not really So a lot of people have asked me, like, well, how do I know I'm going to do what you say and it's going to work? Like what I'm talking about is a tactic or, some kind of, this is the one thing you do and this will fix it. And I think we're way past that. I don't think it's going to be one thing that you fix. I think it's going to be looking at what is it that Google finds unhelpful about your content. And it's not, let's say, one website page and what you used on one website page.
It's interesting that you say that it's not one thing. And I like that you're taking it from a foundational approach of, what are the fundamental things that Google is measuring. And so we kind of have, I have this internal conflict because I see two things that Google could be measuring, and I'm not sure which one. And I probably haven't given enough thought to, well, what if it's both? And so on those two things, we have the thing that you're talking about, which is topical relevance based on the entities. So if you're not familiar with entities, think about trying to compete for a keyword like apple pie. Google needs to figure out which page is more about apple pie than all the other pages. And so to do that, Google has to think about, well, let's look at millions of conversations about apple pie and what are kind of the words that come up commonly in those conversations about apple pie. And then we'll measure those words and we'll quantify which page is more about apple pie than the other pages. So that's kind of like where you've been focusing so far. The area where I feel conflict on helpful content was right around, and this could be totally coincidence, by the way, right around the time the helpful content update came out, there was this presentation change in these obscure keywords. And I saw it largely in the nutrition and protein powder space, where I would look for information about these like protein powders, and Google would call out content from websites. It would be like, here's the pros and cons of using protein powder. Here's an ingredient list of what's in the protein powder. Here's a recommended way to use the protein powder. And these little snippets started appearing in search results for a time. Not all the results, but one or two here and there would show it. And it got me thinking that if Google is crawling for that information and they're parsing that information and then they're storing that information and then they're presenting it back to us, how much of a stretch of the imagination is it to think that they might be scoring based on that information? And that information to me is like, wow, that's kind of helpful information. And so I started my theory craft going down, what if helpful content update is about the quantification of these types of helpful information? But the entity route, that's also helpful information too. It's just a different kind of helpful information. And so, yeah, I've been conflicted, and that's where I've been really confused. What the heck is helpful content?
Well, and how you've said for a long time, our KPIs are not Google's KPIs.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I kind of forked off that, looking at the pages themselves, let's say, because in previous times, we've always examined what went up and what was different about that page than our page, right? But I began to just really focus on, well, to Google, which is a international, incredibly large organization, left hand doesn't know what right hand does. What would they think is helpful content? And if you read what they put out, let's say this last March, when they rolled out the update and they said, oh, by the way, we're going to like bake in the helpful content system. Oh, and guess what? We're going to eliminate 40% of the index. We're going to get rid of essentially the unhelpful content part. And it kind of validated what I was seeing, because I have a site that's been decimated. It kind of like, it was like a baby left on the doorstep in a blanket and said, you know, here, this is awful. I can't even afford to fix it. You know, whatever it is, I can't afford to fix it, but I think it's helpful content. And they were right. And so looking at that, it's like, what would be more unhelpful to somebody who had to keep track of everything than if, let's say, you had 1,000 pages on your site, and each page had multiple URLs that led to that same content. And looking at that, it's like, that would not be helpful content as far as the entity regarding, you know, how to store it and make it to where it can be pulled back up. And, you know, I've been preaching about duplicate content and how not helpful it is. In previous times, I would look at it and I'd say, you know, any content that was bouncing around middle of page 3, that would be my first clue, is like, you know, I wonder if, you know, is everything secure? Are there other URLs that lead to this exact same page? You know, and that's foundational stuff, right? But, you know, in this day and age of engineering our content and doing it that way, like, for instance, in my opinion, I think Shopify sites are incredibly vulnerable in this environment. And
now, this information, correct me if I'm wrong, this is where you're starting to draw from Marie's data pool, right? Is that where the Shopify claim is coming from?
No, for years, I have seen the problem with Shopify sites was you might have product pages, you'd have category pages, and they all display the same content if you take it out of the box, right? So the Marie's information was when I was putting this guide together, because like I had the testing data, I had some, you know, field that with the sites that I had access to, but I knew Marie had access to a ton of sites and had been watching them over time. So that's different. In this case, this is just my experience when people would come and say, what's wrong with my site?
All right. So how did Marie's data fold into this research and these discoveries? Walk us through that a bit.
Sure. So as it kind of came into focus that this potentially was helpful content. Now, that would have been beginning of summer last year. And so she and I normally talk about things. And so I kind of tossed it over the fence, like, hey, if this was a hypothesis and I could prove it, do you see anything in your work that might validate this or dispute it? And so it was then when, like, you know yourself, like when you're working on sites, is that a lot of times you see normal behavior. You're like, oh yes, if I do this, and then I submit it for recrawl within 24 to 48 hours, I should see movement, right? So it was things that didn't behave is kind of where she went back to, because she's like, I have head scratchers. So let me go take a look at that. And as you know, it takes a while to go through your notes and go like, wait, is this really what happened? Let me, piece this together. So that's how we came together on that, was that she had field evidence where she was working on things and noticed that there were also some pages that previously were right up there. And after cumulative updates, they were just gone. I mean, and these are revenue producing pages. And so then just digging in deeper on the basis of the hypothesis and coming up with some sort of structure like, well, why did it not work? Why did it do it to these pages and not these other pages? So that's how we were able to just kind of compare and just take a look at it and go like, this could very well, it doesn't dispute the hypothesis, and it kind of goes right along with it. From a recovery standpoint, right? So there's the creation, like what do we do to create our sites to make them impervious, let's say, to this. But then there's also the how do we fix a site that may have been created, 10 years ago, that the SEO strategy was different 10 years ago. So how do you wade your way through all the things it could be? And then we were left with stuff that was like, that is weird. That is weird why that did it that way. Why Google loved it, 10 years ago and doesn't love it so much now.
Another data point for your case, I think, would be the .it spam network, because right after the helpful content update came out, there was a somewhat large reduction. It didn't obliterate it, but there's a big reduction of .it spam websites. And if you're unfamiliar with .it spam websites, this was a spam network that was so large, you could pick any keyword you could think of. And if you went to the bottom of the search results in Google's index, you would find these sites for any keyword you could imagine. Think about the scale of that. Billions of keywords. They ranked for them all at some place. And so we were doing back of the napkin estimates, and we estimated that the spam network probably had somewhere between 5 to 15% of Google's primary index, because they wouldn't have one website in every keyword. They would have 30. And so when they have 30 websites in every keyword you can imagine, that's a very big allocation of Google's primary index. So after the helpful content update, a lot of that went away. And when I think about how those were built, because we spent a couple weeks really digging into these .it websites and looking at how they were crafted, they were stealing sentences off of different pages and stitching them all together. But it would be one sentence from over here, one sentence from over there. So topically, they were very weak. There was no solid topical core for these pages. And so if Google, as part of the helpful content update, set a topical threshold you must meet for inclusion, that would explain why such a big percentage of that fell out after that update. I don't know if that's what happens, but I think your theory kind of explains that. It doesn't necessarily prove it, but your theory accounts for why that happened, when it happened, and why it happened to that degree. I think it kind of lends itself to explaining that. What do you think, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the show. I mean, the other possibility was that they boosted, the a lot of the social sites, specifically YouTube, but also, TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest, Tumblr, WordPress, and some of the others. So It's
that was a different event. There was the reduction of .it spam, and then most recently they obliterated it with that change. But even before they obliterated it.
Yeah, and you saw it. Well, I saw it dip a couple of times where they made it harder, and then it would come back. They were using different country TLDs. They got a little more, clever. I mean, it used to be in the original incarnation of .it spam. You could spot it easily because every one of the headlines was entirely lowercase, and something .it was very, very easy to spot going in. It got harder to spot. So it's bounced up and up and down as Google's battled it, or their system they didn't pay their server bill. There's a couple of ways that could happen. So
too, think about the volume of pages on, because I think it was like some of them were on the subdomain of the main domain.
Mm-hmm.
And like if they had, I don't know, let's just say like 10,000 pages on there, and they didn't have the topical center, right? And they were just, at that point, I wonder if they got tagged as unhelpful content, or majority of them did, maybe. And that could be a way that they could do it algorithmically without having to manually go, you're fired, right?
Yeah, and I don't know that I know that I didn't study any of the .it sites or subdomains to see if they were all centered around a specific topic or not.
I did. I mean, I poked around in there. I wasn't as, like the curiosity, like, what kind of car accident is this?
Right.
Were they wearing their seatbelts? And so like, and I think we all know that one of the main components of that was we were looking at it through a way to see what Google saw, right?
Mm-hmm.
That if you went there as a human, it threw you over to a site that you probably wouldn't want your kids looking behind your shoulder.
Right.
But yeah, it was kind of like, and it wasn't like, let's say, for instance, I know we were looking at some personal injury attorneys with a city, right? And then I would try and find the additional pages based off that subdomain. And they were all over the place. It was like my early testing, where it was like, what topic am I going to write? Oh, I know. I saw, mini Rydell football helmets. Let's write about that, or then the next one might have been, oh, how do I grow, how do I prune crepe myrtles? So it was that kind of distance between them. And it didn't have it wasn't like every subdomain was, let's say, all the pages on that subdomain were about personal injury lawyers in various cities. I think if they'd done that, might have been a different story.
Right.
So
I think another complicating factor in the helpful content update is Google has effectively cried wolf with past updates. So, for example, shortly after we discovered the .it spam network, Google came out with a series of what they labeled web spam updates. And at the time, we were like, oh boy, we've been talking about web spam. Google's now doing a web spam update. They're going to get the .it network. They're going to bear down on the Kyle Roof style rhinoplasty plano sites. They're going to get the keyword stuffers. They're going to get the ransomware websites. They're going to get the content cloakers. They're going to come after. So we set up all of our test sites. Let's see which ones they get. We start looking at the canaries in the coal mine. Are they going to get the rhinoplasty plano, or are they going to get the ransomware? Let's see which ones fall out. And we started monitoring it. And after these series of web spam updates, Google got none of it. They didn't fix a single category of web spam. And that's when Clint Butler came in and said, it was just backlinks. And it's like, oh my God, he's right. They did nothing with web spam. They just pruned backlinks. And that's all it was. That's all it was. And so I think one of the complicating factors like I have with Google's named updates is now it's like, oh, they call it helpful content update. Does that mean they prune backlinks? And I think about it when Google only prunes backlinks, what's in it for Google to only do that and to focus so hard on that? And then this isn't proven, by the way. It's just like my opinion, my tinfoil theory crafting here. But it seems to me that when you play that game and only that game, that's kind of like you're saying, well, I feel like you're getting free traffic and I don't feel like you deserve free traffic. You need to pay and pay per click. So I'm going to take away your free traffic. And if that's the only thing you're doing is, picking and choosing who loses backlink authority, that's kind of what that game looks like to me. That's my opinion. That's what it looks like the game is. It's just saying you're getting more free traffic than we like, and we feel you should pay for it. And so how do we know that the helpful content update isn't more of that? And in my mind, we don't. We just got to make educated guesses. We may never know unless an insider leaks it or something. Lee, do you have any thoughts on any of that?
No, I was not on that specifically. I was going back to something that Google had said and Carolyn had echoed. We got rid of 40% of, the page in the index type of thing. And when we saw a couple of weeks ago, it looks like the primary index has expanded. It's just filled with different stuff now. So I'm having a hard time reconciling, those two statements. It got smaller, but it got larger. It seems like they're potentially going against some of their own definitions, if that makes sense.
Well, there's the index of everything they have stored, and we'll just call that the full index. And then the primary index is what they make readily searchable in real time. So you type in a keyword, right, boom, they're pulling from, but that's much smaller than the full index.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Cache the best parts. And they could have reduced the full index by 40%, but the cached primary index, they also made larger. Like, both could be true.
So then here's the conundrum is that, Google's constantly crawling and discovering. So if you had a site that got de-indexed, they'd say, oh, this is crap content, we're throwing it the hell out, .it site. And they built some links to it and those links get crawled. Are those things flagged somewhere so that they can't come back into the index? Or do they get crawled and reprocessed, because a link exists now that didn't exist before?
We know
you have to have an exclusion, list, which is basically the index of shit that can't be in the index.
Well, wouldn't that be through the serving portion of the indexation system? That's where they could put filters and things like that, and probably change them quickly, right? Without having to move a bunch of stuff around. What do you think?
We know from testing that websites that are excluded from search results can still boost pages. Like that is the foundation of tiered link building. Like, that research is why tiered link building is still a thing today and still works today. If you don't believe in that concept, you have a hard time explaining tiers. It's yeah.
But it's interesting,
It's
when you get rid of that stuff out of the primary index, if you just said, oh, we just deleted it, well, that means that it can come back in. If there's other filters in place, that means you have that 40% sits somewhere as almost a suppression list for indexation and or serving, which seems to be, I'm not sure what the engineering savings would be on that. You follow me? It's like having a hard time reconciling the engineering behind the verbiage.
Well, one thing I know that Google has its nomenclature, and Carolyn is fond of adopting that nomenclature. One thing we do see in the volatility tool is that the concepts of being included or excluded in search results and the concept of being tested for positioning upward and downward do happen independently. Like we see Google making inclusion, exclusion all the way up into the top 3. You can have time sharing that where you're only in 10% of searches. You could be number 2 and only be in 10% of searches. You could also be number 2 and Google is testing you down to position 36, part of the time. And so they do look like they're independent things. And that's a weird thing to consider, that, you could be ranked number 1, but not included for a term. Like that's technically possible because, these things appear to be independently controlled.
Do you think it has anything to do? Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you think it has anything to do with the storage and retrieval process? Like, I love the volatility report in Quora. I mean, it's been eye-opening, but what if that could be how they introduced some volatility into the SERPs? Is maybe they've got it stored in different places, but we're rolling the dice, right? 20 times in a row, and they might have to what is that called?
Yeah.
Reroute.
When I was doing a lot of update detection type of activity in past years, we would see the propagation issue that you're describing. And those propagation issues, they do exist, but they don't last for long. So eventually all the servers get on largely the same page, except for Google's experimental servers that are about 1 in 500. They always tend to be different. And one of the ways we would actually detect these core updates happening is we would look for those propagation characteristics, because we'd be like, oh, they're doing the thing again. And so that's how we would know before Google would announce it that they're doing a big update. So yeah, there is some of that, but the propagation delay stuff, it tends to last 24 hours and then it goes away. So I don't think there's a large amount of, you get radically different outcomes on normal data servers. I think mostly they largely agree on the story. There is some differences, but they're minor differences, like, oh, on this one you're 4 and on this one you're 3. It tends to be subtle distinctions like that. So yeah, I mean that's in there, but I wouldn't suspect it's the big culprit. I wouldn't count on that being the case.
Yeah, so that's probably enough to digest at this point. I mean, I do think like pushing it out, it's possible I might have ruffled a few feathers, but I think the main thing is I really wanted to help people understand essentially the Google word soup, right? That
Yep.
helpful content to you might be different than what they view it as. And then if that's true, what might that look like? And then, like I say, one of the biggest questions I had was, are there sites that to all extents and purposes are immune to that requirement? So, sometimes you can understand what something is by understanding what doesn't react to it, and what are those characteristics, and how would they play against each other? Are they truly diametrically opposed? And it definitely seems like they are. So anyway, I think there's a lot in the guide, and it's also, buying the guide also helps support me spend my day doing this, and sharing what I find. I felt that the findings were compelling enough, and I think there are a lot of people. I think there's a lot of people that are making large life changes, not high end SEOs probably, but I think folks that had a certain success in SEO in the early days and might not have noticed the shift. And plus, like I say, the documentation from Google doesn't really shine the light on what they're measuring. They seem to respond to questions about the helpful content. And I keep saying this, this is an SEO issue. This is not a CRO issue. This is something that they're measuring. And we have to consider, removing our assumptions. What does that mean? It may not be just helpful to people. It may be that what would Google think is helpful to them or unhelpful to them?
All right. So correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to characterize this report you have. So correct me if I get the details wrong. So what we have is a theory about what the helpful content update is. And so over here, we have this debate of, is this actually what Google means when they say helpful content update? And that's like one debate that's raging on, is how did Google define helpful content update? What is it? And then we have this other thing over here where you found that if you don't have a topical core at a certain threshold, you have a hard time being included in the index. So you have these field observations and you have a methodology to fix a problem you're seeing, whether that is actually the thing that Google's talking about or not. This is a real thing over here you know how to fix and solve. And so you have this report that goes over a methodology for fixing that problem, that real problem you can see and observe. And the funds from that report continue to fuel on crawl or no crawl so that this research can continue into the existing future. And what I want people to understand is how many hours per week go into this research that you're doing. Like how hard is it, and how much do you rely on people's assistance to keep this research alive?
Good question. I mean, it's very easy for it to almost take the entire day, even just in terms of documenting data, pulling it out, taking a look, recording it, looking at things. And sometimes, as you know, when you look at something, you have to look at it for a minute or two before you can kind of go like, does this mean anything? Right. So yeah, this is what I'm doing, this in consulting. And It is definitely the only correction I would make in terms of the guide. It's designed to illustrate a potential place to dig if your site has been hit by the helpful content system. When you're looking in Search Console, I don't go through a strategy of how to fix it, because what's interesting is every site seems to have a different problem. But if you're looking at it through topical glasses, it helps you start the process. So the whole point of this is where can you dig? And in Search Console, if you look at the composite, like, here's my site and, all the little charts, if you start to see everything gain, the chart go up like last May, June, and July, and then you see it drop hard at the end of the September helpful content, and then you see it drop hard in the this past March core. You, based on what I've seen so far, that's the textbook definition of how you know you've been hit. And
Okay.
Consequently, your revenue stops, right?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people feeling real world pain. So having a place to look is at least, something you can do. What does this report cost? What can people expect?
$55.
All right, so that's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
All right, so that's not unreasonable for what went into producing this.
Yeah, and where can they get it? Where can they get it, Carolyn?
You can go to AmericanWayMedia.com, and on the homepage there's a link to Decoding, Google's helpful content system. It's actually a Gumroad platform product. So when you get there, you'll see it. It's embedded in there. I do want to make it clear, like Ted was sharing, this is ongoing research as things present. And I was thinking I might have had, some helpful content recovery to share, but I think it's not necessarily a site that got hit by helpful content. So that's the thing, is that it's a particular type of site that again gets hit. But yeah, it's all there on the AmericanWayMedia.com. There's also a bit.ly link, bit.ly/helpful content system.
Yeah, and kind of the way I would view it is this is really supporting the research and making sure it continues, because we need more research and recovering from this. And the report is a thing to try. It may or may not be the thing that's keeping you down, but it's something to try. But if it works for you, that's amazing. But I kind of see the reason to contribute is to continue this research, because we need to find answers. And if nobody's trying to find answers, answers are never coming. So I would view it first as keep it alive, and maybe this thing is the bullet you need. Maybe it's the thing that's keeping you down. We'll cross our fingers on that. But there are so many problems. This might not be the exact thing that got this one exact site, but it's gonna find its place with some people as being, yeah, that got it, but it might not be everybody. Is that correct?
I would say that's fair. One of the things that I'm working with, and Marie is working with me on this, in terms of developing a protocol for helpful content recoveries. Based on what I'm seeing, I don't believe anybody is spontaneously going to recover. And much like a the medical show house, it's never one thing. But if you kind of have that sort of graph line that I described, I think that's going to be, the first level diagnostic. It's like, is it likely that this is a helpful content injury? And so far, every site I've seen that has done that, that has been the issue when I look at it.
So is this a solution that you would say takes, months to play out? Or is this potentially a solution where if this is your problem and you need to make payroll by Friday, give it a go? Because I'm wagering that based on what you just said, that this is something to look at, but it's going to be a crawl back out of the hole type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think depending on what has triggered that unhelpful label, it depends on the nature of that as to how quickly one can crawl out. And I would think preliminary testing and things like that, just finding something that, let's say, was a duplicate content issue and got fixed, on a per page level, it might take, not that long, right? But if you need to have a tipping point of depending on how many pages your site is, because if you've got 100 URLs, like I say, and half of them have like 2 or 3 URLs that lead to the same page, you've got to fix that first. And if it's that thing that you can fix, okay, it might happen quicker. But if you have to go down into the topical, like, do you have too much of the same topic on a site? You got to make some decisions, and they might take longer to decide. But I don't think this is unrecoverable. I don't think that, again, this is based on what I'm seeing and what we know about when you give Google what it wants or you take away what it hates, it usually responds pretty quickly through the indexation system. So that's why I'm incredibly positive about this in terms of I don't have any doubt that if that is the issue, that it will get fixed. It's not insurmountable, and it's not something that will you will apply energy to it and it won't respond.
And you'll give us a link that I can put in the description after the show.
I will. So, thank you so much for I've been wanting to talk about this for a long time, and thought it was going to come out in a different way, and so it kind of came together really quickly in terms of the guide. So I'm super happy to have you ask questions. I'm happy to answer questions. And again, if anyone has data that contradicts this, I want to see it. I'm super curious about it.
I think it's hard to contradict it. I think the only place where there can be like strong disagreement is this what Google describes as the helpful content update. And the only way we'll ever know that is if a Google insider spills the beans.
Right.
Support the research. And here's something else you can try if you're looking for things you can try. I think that's a good roll of the dice if you're looking for that. And if you primarily view it as let's support the research and the benefit is I get another thing I can try, that's pretty cool. I like that. That's worth $55 in my book. All right, let's look at some questions here. Let's see. Chris says, heard Clint talk about hidden divs, what to add to a hidden div and in what circumstances you should use them. Well, I don't know what Clint said, so I can't speak to that particularly. I'm kind of moving away from hidden divs. They still work. for SEO, but kind of the rationale, the general rationale for using them in SEO was to see the outcome before you invest in the content. So the the white-ish hat way of using the hidden divs was, let's see how Google responds to the tuning, and then if we get a good response from the tuning, then let's make real content tuned to that standard. So you would go back and true it up to white hat after seeing what you're going to get for that work. But when AI came out, that became unnecessary work because now you can get human readable content and you can tune it to a standard on the first go. So you don't have to go back and true it up. It's just as easy as the hidden div methodology, but you don't have to go back and true it up later. So I'm thinking in terms of minimum viable SEO, we can eliminate a step here without using the hidden divs. So do hidden divs still work? Yes, they do. And they'll probably always work. Because think about responsive design. That's going to hide content. Google's still going to rank by it. So if Google made hidden divs worthless and not work and no index, then mobile sites would tank everywhere. And so, yeah, that's just not going to happen. Lee, what do you think about hidden divs and the evolution?
Yeah, I'll go and attack this from because I heard this question in a couple of different forms that people usually give it. One, I want to dispel that, there's this conception that maybe the hidden div is the magic thing that'll fix my page. It's no more magic putting content in a hidden div than it is putting it on the damn page. So there's no additional benefit. There's no super secret backdoor into Google that they're like, oh, they got a hidden div, we're going to shoot them up to number one. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is the general question, whatever you put in a hidden div, it's just something in the HTML. What's missing from your page? The there's a misconception, I think, behind that there's something magical that I can put in there to make things happen, and there's nothing magical about it. You just have to. It's SEO. It's straight SEO.
It's happening to like quite a few people.
So that'd be my 2 cents on it.
So just to be clear, Lee, because I think this is something that folks ask a lot about. If I had a page and I either did not want to or could not put a hidden div on my page, I could just put whatever I wanted at the bottom of my page and see how Google reacts.
Or the top of the page.
Or the top of the page, yeah, that's true.
Or anywhere else you get SEO benefit. Anywhere else that Google will crawl and evaluate that content.
Exactly.
Let's see. All right, I'm curious. Some previous brand terms that seem to have demoted to broad match after the update. The website name now triggers a ton of people also ask and competition websites and organic page one. All right, so I'm trying to unpack this a little bit. So you used to put in a brand and boom, your site was number one. Now you're putting in a brand and you're seeing a variety of things happen. So you're seeing people also ask, and you're seeing other websites that mention the brand. And so you have more competition on page. And so some of that is what I would describe as a meta blending update. So a meta blending update is when you look at the search result page on Google, how much of it is organic search versus how much is people also ask and local map pack and ad search and product search. And so Google is a multi-search engine, and they're blending multiple search engine output onto the page. And when they adjust that mix, that is the meta blend update. When they say, oh, we're going to put more people also ask, or we're going to put more product search into these kinds of searches, that is a meta update. And as a result, organic gets, less or more exposure based on that meta blending. And so Yeah, it's totally possible that on brand terms, Google updated the meta mixture of different search solutions. It could also be topical as the trigger, maybe not the brand. Maybe it's like, oh, this brand is in the golfing space and things in the golfing space get this meta blend. Could, so I wonder about what the trigger is on the meta blending behaviors. Um, and I do know that when it comes to like trademarks, Google has historically been very unfair. Small businesses' trademarks don't get honored, but big businesses' trademarks do get honored. It's just like horrifically unfair how Google has handled that over the decades. Um, so yeah, there's a lot to unpack in there, and I'm not sure which part specifically you're running into. What do you think, Lee?
Yeah, generally speaking, I agree with what you said. The diagnostic on that for me has always been, if you go look for Bob's Plumbing, as a search term, there's 50 of those across the US. So, it's going to be hard to say, oh, did you mean this particular Bob's Plumbing, in this particular location? But if you go search for something like SEO Tool Lab, you're going to see SEO Tool Lab, the website, and then all the related properties and press releases. And it's going to be very, very clear that the brand dominates. And if your brand isn't dominating, then Google's not clear that that search term is a brand term.
And that's an interesting point because if you put in CNN, Google removes the two result filtering limit. So you can now have 100 CNN.com results. So if you search for Donald Trump CNN, because you search for a brand, the two result filter is lifted. So if Google doesn't see your brand as a brand, you might get the imposed two result filter, and then other things get to compete. Whereas if Google saw you as a brand, you could have 100 results for your brand term. And so maybe that question is about, oh no, could Google not be seeing my brand as a brand and I'm getting a different treatment?
Yeah, so if SEO Tool Lab is a weak brand, then SEO Tool would be the trigger thing. And you would see all sorts of SEO software and other sites, ranking up and around the top, along with hopefully SEO Tool Lab. But if it's not there and it's not dominating, your brand isn't seen by Google as the answer to that query.
And from what I've seen, brands require a lot of strictness. You can't, like, Sears is my example here. You can't be Sears with the capital S part of the time, Sears with the lowercase s part of the time, Sears.com with the capital S, Sears.com lowercase s, Sears, Inc. part of the time, capital S, Sears Roebuck Incorporated. You need one brand. It can't be 15 incarnations. And so if Google is unsure, it goes into split testing and it does weird things. So if you haven't been consistent with your branding, I wouldn't be surprised if Google is wondering if it's a brand at all. All right. Let's see. Seems like Carolyn thinks topical relevance is still important. But what about topical authority? Does adding extra relevant content help existing content rank higher? Carolyn, what are your thoughts?
So I think anytime you can increase relevance on page, you should do it. I don't discount topical authority because we've always, I think, categorized that by, backlinks, right? There's on page and there's backlinks. So I would say, I am a very strong on page proponent.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've known for a while that relevant backlinks boost better than irrelevant backlinks. And so I think it kind of all ties together as an ecosystem. Even though it may not be intentionally designed for that impact has emerged
Hmm.
as a best practice.
And also, let me
Um,
say this: the concept of topical authority is vague in the SEO community. We throw it around like everybody knows what it is, but if you ask somebody to define it, then it becomes very murky very quickly. So, what is an authority site? Well, it's a big site that talks a lot about a particular topic. Well, one topic or a lot of topics. Is Amazon an authority site? It covers a lot of different topics. So it starts to get weird in a hurry. So I'm not sure that it's an easy, yes, no, this is the way to marry those two concepts together type of answer.
let's see. I'm beginning to think Google has passed over too much of the reins of AI to the algorithm. They no longer fully understand. Alas, a possible reset may be required. Thoughts? Well, here's the thing. One of the things that kind of baffles me about the Maycore update is, I like to think of SEO models the way we think of theoretical physics. Not from a nerdy, super nerd. I'm the most nerdy nerd of the nerds thing, which Clint would love to make the case of that. But from the case that I see these SEOs and they have these models and theories about SEO, and when you look at them, they're always these 11-dimensional things that are closer to string theory than they are to Newtonian mechanics. And so if you have this 11-dimensional SEO model, it's like really perplexing and hard to prove. And that's largely what I see out there are these string theory models of SEO. And I like to say we're looking for fundamental forces. We're just trying to identify, what is gravity in SEO? What is the base fundamental? And when there's a big core update, we start looking at our base fundamentals. We look at keyword density. We look at certain exploits like rhinoplasty plano and nothing but schema, and we look at entity density, and we look at factor diversity, and we look for these fundamental forces, and have any of the fundamental forces changed? And as a result of this latest update, it appears that none of the fundamental forces has significantly changed. They're all still in play. They might have been rebalanced, but it's not like they took they did something where rhinoplasty plano doesn't work anymore, or nothing but schema doesn't work anymore. No, they all still work. White text on a white background still works. Hidden divs still work. None of the fundamental forces went away. All right. So the question becomes, what is this update, and where did all of this dumpster fire chaos come from? And that's why I'm looking for other things. That's why I'm looking at the published Googlebot IP list, because if Google's not maintaining that published IP list and Cloudflare uses that published, hypothetically, I don't know that they do, but if Cloudflare uses that published IP list for that allow verified bots feature, that would explain the dumpster fire chaos. It's a possible explanation that could, in theory, happen. And so that's why we look at these fundamental forces. Now, Google is putting in AI more and more. And what I've seen is that Google is reluctant, unwilling, or unable to fix a lot of the issues in search. And I get the feeling that Google would rather replace it than fix it. So that's kind of my read of the room. is search is so expensive and complicated that they're really hoping that an AI solution can just allow them to throw it in the waste bin. That's my read of the room. Now, is that happening soon? I doubt it. I think search is how they make money, so it is around even though they don't like it. And what do you think, Lee?
I'm gonna go in two parts on this. If you go back way old school, AI, pre-machine learning, where it was just, a bunch of statisticians in a room writing regression equations to try to get something that got better results. You have so many engineers coding this stuff that there's no way that anybody knows, what all's in there. Now, when you take machine learning, AI, neural nets, all these sort of things, nobody knows what's inside of them. They go, they learn, they create relationships, they output stuff, and we evaluate, hey, this output looks pretty good, or this output is crap. So when you combine those two things together, there's no way that anybody at Google knows fully what's all in there or what the relative weightings are. So whether the reboot part of it would be a question for whether you think the results are good or bad, or better or worse than they used to be. But I think the problem with Google is that they've been struggling with scale. We see more and more cracks in the system. Even with the amount of content that's being created is exponentially increasing, they cannot handle that sort of volume. So they've got to do as many 80-20 things as they can and just hold on for dear life right now. This is kind of my read of their stuff. So I'm not sure that it's a reboot, but I am sure that nobody there knows, what the hell's inside the box.
Let's see. Jordan Lane Parker says helpful content can also equal community content for one part of it. Yeah. It's hard. There are multiple theories of even what it is, and it's going to be hard to disprove any of those theories. So I kind of like the approach of let's not use Google's nomenclature. Let's not claim that we know what Google meant. But let's observe a thing, talk about a thing, and recommend solutions for a thing we can observe. And so I love that part of it. I'm less interested in the what did Google mean by calling it penguin. I don't care what Google meant. I'm looking for things I can see and witness and measure and influence. And if I can see and measure and influence, then I don't care what Google calls it. Let's see. What if the community content isn't helpful? Well, we're getting back into the naming and what did Google mean by the name debate. So we know that entities are helpful. So what Carolyn proposed is viable, and we know that's a thing that works. We know that's a thing that can cause problems. Entities are real in SEO. So I think on that part of everything she said, she's on very stable ground. And on my part, my theory where I saw the ingredients and the pros and cons, that wasn't observable. That really happened. I just can't tie that thing, that feature, was what Google meant by helpful content. Like those could be unrelated. And I don't know the mind of Google, so I can't really prove it in any way. I can't test for it and definitively prove what Google meant. And that's why I hate that using Google's terminology leaves us in a place where we can never know things, where using our observations leaves us in a place where we can know things. And so I like that approach better. Let's see. Jordan says it needs to be moderated. So yeah, this is all coming in on the discussions, and this came from out of Lily's presentation, I believe, that Google is relying on content that has human moderators to enforce it being human worthy content. I might be miscrediting that, but I thought it came out of a presentation Lily did recently. I'm not sure. So forgive me if I'm wrong on that. But yeah, I think there's some merit to that notion that Google would pawn off moderation onto other people and would favorably reward that benefit because they don't want to moderate their content themselves. That meets the MO. I would not be shocked if that were true. I don't know if that is true, but I would not be shocked if that were true. So let's see, Ted, any ways to game the Google Nav boost? Thank you for the super chat, by the way. Really appreciate that. Any ways to game Google's Nav boost click data systems? None of the bots and software doesn't work. CTR tends to be better for local SEO than it is for organic web search. So if you're trying to leverage CTR for organic web search, I'm not surprised you're not seeing results. I will warn you that the amounts that people use to get success are very small. So if you're doing lots of CTR, that is often a very bad mistake. The other things I would want you to consider is that you should really be testing and experimenting with these concepts in a safe place. You should not be going direct to clients and money site out of the gate using tactics like these. Because think about it. If you send Google a signal that this is content that trends, this is trending content and should be treated as trending content, what should happen when it's no longer trending? All right. So you could actually inflict harm by characterizing evergreen content as trending content that should be handled like trending content. So, be careful what you ask for. Make sure you test it and don't test on your clients. In terms of that, there's a number of people who have successfully tested and demonstrated CTR in local. I know of no one who has a confident solution in organic web search. Lee, what's your understanding?
Yeah, I would say that. The other thing is, again, we're looking at, sort of tactics to game the system. I would sit there and suggest that if your on page is correct, your links are good, you don't need CTR. I mean, it's certainly effective when used, appropriately, but it is not necessary as a ranking thing.
In your follow-up, you say from a leak, Google's click data system does use the same exact click fraud detection system from Google Ads. And I would caution anybody from doing click fraud on ads. And the reasons you don't want to do that, I think, are that you open yourself up to civil liabilities. There are demonstrated damages, financial damages, when you engage in that behavior. And it's totally unnecessary, and it's a really awful thing to do to someone. They're just trying to pay their bills and take care of their families too. So why would you inflict that kind of harm on someone? So for click fraud and pay-per-click, just stay away from it. It's not worth the trouble it'll get you into. And yeah, Google probably has invested more in R&D on click fraud than anywhere else, because that advertising platform is the everything to Google. Without that, Google goes the way of Hotbot and AltaVista and Excite. So absolutely, if people lose confidence in ads being real and working, then they die. So they're click fraud detection on the pay-per-click side is probably the single best piece of research and engineering Google has. Like everything else they could survive without, they cannot survive without that piece. I'd say it's even more important than web search. They can do other things and still make money, but they can't make money if they can't solve click fraud. So yeah, that's an amazing system, but to the same degree on the local side, there are people getting results. So, but they're not clicking on ads. Don't do that. Let's see. Think a couple more here. Let me go to live so I see all messages, make sure I didn't miss anything. Let's see. Music Calgary says amazing work, Carolyn. Thanks a lot. And Illusion East says happy to see you all. Can I create any tool website from scratch in 24 hours but can't build a single backlink? My organic traffic limit is 300 a day for each of my websites. Any way to solve this? Well, that's very vague, so it's hard to be specific, but it sounds like you're ignoring a category of ranking signal, and ignoring categories of signals is very bad since we know Google is a diversity of signals system. So the more types of ranking signals you have, the more shenanigans you can get away with aggressively tuning those. So if you only have a few signals, Google kind of shuts your tactics down. And that's that feeling that everything you were doing in SEO was working great for a while, then it kind of all stopped working. Sound familiar? And on the agency side, you hear it coming in the door. Yeah, we used to have an SEO. It was going great for a while. Then it kind of all stopped working. So we had to let him go. And now we're here talking to you. Sound familiar? So that's kind of that system. So it's looking for diversity of signals. That's how you get unstuck. That's how you avoid getting stuck. And if you're ignoring backlinks, that's a way of getting stuck. And so I wouldn't do that. What do you think, Lee?
I'd run a core report and follow the roadmap. It sounds like there's a lot of stuff that's missing, so I would just do that.
Yeah, get some data on how you're different. Doesn't have to be Cora, but figure out how you're different than your higher ranking competitors and address those differences. All right, that's it. Thank you, Carolyn. Glad you were able to come on the show, and we'll have to have you back. Let us know if you have new research you want to share.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Lee and Charles.
And remind everyone where they can find the report again.
It's going to be AmericanWayMedia.com, and there's a page called Decoding Google's Helpful Content System. So you'll find it right there on the homepage. Click that link and it'll take you right there.
Yeah, help support the research. That's what I say.